On the morning of February 13, 2009, Amber Dubois left home in Escondido, California, carrying the kind of excitement that makes an ordinary school day feel important. She was 14 years old, a straight-A student, quiet by nature, deeply attached to animals, and already thinking ahead in a way many adults admired. She read constantly, kept close friends, stayed out of trouble, and planned to start college early. That morning mattered to her for a simple reason that became heartbreaking later. She was supposed to turn in the deposit for a lamb she had already named Nanette. It was a school agriculture project, but to Amber it felt bigger than that. It was something she had waited for all year. She never made it to school. Her mother, Carrie, remembered the way Amber left that morning. She was happy. She was focused. Nothing about her suggested confusion, rebellion, or a secret plan to disappear. That detail would matter because almost immediately, the people around the case split into two familiar camps. One side leaned toward the easiest explanation. Maybe she ran off. Maybe she skipped school. Maybe she was just a teenager pushing limits. The other side saw something else. Amber had never missed a day of school. She had no history of running away. Her room, her journal, her computer, her habits, all pointed in the same direction. This was not a girl drifting into trouble. This was a girl moving toward a day she cared about. By late afternoon, Amber still had not come home. Carrie was at work expecting the normal rhythm of the day to continue. Instead, the silence widened. Dave, Carrie's longtime boyfriend, realized Amber had not returned. He checked the school. He checked the farm where her agriculture activities would have taken her. He learned Amber had not arrived anywhere she was supposed to be. The moment Carrie heard that, the truth landed on her with a force people rarely forget. She did not think Amber was out having fun. She believed something had happened to her daughter. That instinct came fast, and it came hard. Within minutes, calls were made, neighbors were contacted, and a search began. The problem was not just that Amber was missing. It was that by the time anyone knew she was missing, nearly the whole day had already passed. She had likely been gone for close to 9 hours. In cases like this, time does not simply move forward. It closes doors. It erases footsteps. It turns certainty into fragments. Escondido mobilized quickly once the alarm was raised, and by the next day the community was searching. But Carrie felt the first hours slipping away in the worst possible direction. The early assumption that Amber had run away cut deeply, not only because it wasted precious time, but because it erased who she was. Search efforts focused on party spots, boys, and the usual places adults check when they think a teenager is acting out. Amber's life did not fit that script. Her room told a different story. Her internet history was filled with animals and learning. Her bedside books matched the same pattern. She had a couple of close friends. Nothing suggested a hidden double life. The more closely Amber's private world was examined, the clearer one truth became. She had not left voluntarily. Somebody had taken her. That realization should have brought clarity, but instead it opened a second nightmare. There were no witnesses. No obvious crime scene. No useful trail. No direct lead. The city had roughly 100 registered offenders at the time, and yet one of the strongest suspicions settled much closer to home. Dave was the last person known to have seen Amber alive. He had written the check for the lamb. He had watched her eat cereal before leaving the house. On paper, it seemed simple. But cases like this are rarely simple when the facts are still scattered and emotion begins to fill the empty spaces. Carrie expected Dave's day to be ordinary. He should have gone to work, stayed there, and come home later to discover Amber was missing. Instead, when he explained his day in detail, the routine she expected was gone. He had taken the day off work without warning. He had not answered a call from the school about Amber's absence. Around lunchtime he showed up at Carrie's workplace with chocolate and roses for Valentine's Day, even though they had never really celebrated it before. Later he went to a movie by himself. For a man Carrie saw as a creature of habit, the day felt wrong from beginning to end. That was the moment suspicion turned personal. Some people would say the strangest person in the room is not always the guilty one. Others would say a day like that is exactly how hidden guilt looks before it is named. Carrie felt the second possibility in her bones. After the interview, she returned home and noticed a necklace hanging from the bedpost in the bedroom she had shared with Dave. She believed Amber had been wearing it the morning she disappeared. Whether that detail was proof or panic hardly mattered to a mother living inside dread. She begged for the house to be searched. She wanted action, not caution. As the tension grew, a deeper history came into view. Dave and Amber had not been getting along well in the weeks before she vanished. Amber liked being alone in her room, reading quietly. Dave wanted her to be more involved with the family. At one point he had removed her bedroom door so she could not isolate herself. There had been friction, resentment, and then, just before she disappeared, what looked like a truce. Dave had even taken her to buy books. Less than 12 hours later, Amber was gone. To Carrie, this was unbearable. She did not necessarily believe Dave had planned to kill Amber. What haunted her was another possibility, one many people secretly fear because it feels so plausible. Maybe there was a confrontation. Maybe something happened in anger. Maybe it was covered up. She could not stay in the house with that fear. Carrie took her younger daughter, Allison, and left. She kept searching for Amber while Dave remained behind, his own life collapsing under the weight of the accusation and the disappearance. His business faltered. Debt grew. The relationship broke apart. The search moved into months, then into half a year, and then into something even harder to endure than panic. Uncertainty became normal. It is one of the cruelest states a family can live in. There is no funeral, no rescue, no ending, just the same missing space every morning. 6 months into the search, a woman from Maine reached out with a dog trained in long-distance scent work. Carrie sent Amber's hairbrush and other personal items so the dog could learn her scent. The trail led north of Escondido, toward the Native American community of Paula. On paper, that should have meant very little. Scents do not usually last that long. But grief changes how people hear impossible things. If the trail felt fresh, maybe Amber was still alive. For a moment, hope returned in a form that almost hurt more than despair. Carrie followed it because parents in that position learn to follow everything. Nothing was found. By February 2010, a full year had passed. A jogathon at the high school marked the anniversary of Amber's disappearance and raised money for continued searching, but the case had not advanced in any meaningful way. The search that had once filled streets and fields began to lose force. Escondido slowly returned to ordinary life. Carrie did not. She stayed away from Dave, stayed fixed on Amber's website, stayed inside a private world of looking and waiting. Then, just 2 weeks after that one-year mark, another girl vanished in broad daylight, and suddenly the impossible no longer felt isolated. On February 25, 2010, 17-year-old Chelsea King went for a run in Rancho Bernardo Community Park and did not come back. She left behind her car and belongings. Chelsea was athletic, driven, and preparing for college. She used running the way some people use silence, to steady herself and think clearly. As the hours passed and temperatures dropped, her parents, Brent and Kelly King, went from assuming she was simply delayed to realizing something far more serious had happened. Carrie heard the news and drove to help search, not because she knew Chelsea, but because she knew exactly what those first hours felt like. At the search center, grief recognized grief immediately. Carrie met the Kings and joined their efforts. She brought volunteers she had met during Amber's case. She offered time, energy, and the kind of understanding nobody wants to gain. Within 2 days, a vital clue appeared near a running trail. Chelsea's underwear and socks were found. The discovery changed everything. Until then, there had still been room for the soft lies families tell themselves to survive another hour. Maybe she was injured somewhere. Maybe she would be found alive. After the clothing was recovered, that hope became harder to hold. As the search intensified, Carrie found herself reliving Amber's disappearance through another family's pain. But this time she was not carrying it alone. Kelly and Brent knew what it meant to wait as daylight faded. Carrie knew what it meant when the waiting stretched far beyond one day. Their connection grew in that raw space where words are almost useless but presence still matters. And in the middle of that shared fear came the first real break in the case. DNA from the clothing pointed to Chelsea and to John Albert Gardner III, a 30-year-old convicted sex offender living just 8 miles from the Dubois home. The shock ran deeper than one arrest. People like to imagine danger as distant, faceless, and easy to spot. But Gardner had been living nearby, inside a system that had already identified him as a threat. A task force moved quickly. He was arrested and questioned. In the interview room, he showed little emotion. He denied involvement with Chelsea. Yet when he was left alone with her photograph, his composure slipped and his anger turned toward the image in front of him. Then came the detail that changed Amber's case forever. During questioning, Gardner mentioned Amber Dubois on his own, before anyone had given him a reason to do it. That single moment cracked open a second investigation. For more than a year, Amber's disappearance had floated between theories, suspicions, and dead ends. Dave's strange day had been dissected. Carrie's certainty had divided people. Ordinary life had been stripped down to one repeating question. Then Gardner said Amber's name, and the center of the story shifted. The suspicion that had once settled inside Carrie's home moved outward. The possibility of a serial predator was no longer abstract. It had a name, a face, and now a connection between two girls taken 12 days apart on the calendar, 1 year apart in time. Even then, there was still no closure. Without Chelsea's body, the case remained unstable. Searchers kept going through rain and exhaustion. Thousands showed up day after day. On the 5th night, a body was found on the shore of Lake Hodges. It was Chelsea. The search ended in the way every family dreads and many already sense before anyone says it aloud. For the Kings, grief hardened into a desperate need for justice. For some, only the death penalty would do. For others, a different truth pressed harder. Gardner might be the only person who knew where Amber was. This became the emotional fault line at the heart of the case. Some people believe justice is strongest when punishment is absolute. Others believe truth can matter even more than punishment when a family has been left in darkness. Near the peak of their own grief, the King family made a decision that still stops people in their tracks. In exchange for Gardner confessing to Amber's murder and revealing the location of her remains, they agreed to support taking the death penalty off the table. It was an act that looked impossible from the outside and deeply human from within. They had just lost Chelsea, yet they chose to help another family end a year of not knowing. Carrie received the news through tears. The family that had entered her life as strangers only days earlier had handed her something no search had been able to find. Gardner led officers 23 miles north of Escondido, to a hillside near Paula. It was the same general area where the scent dog had pointed months earlier. There, on a disturbed patch of ground, Amber's remains were recovered. She was identified through dental records. In one sense, the search was over. In another, it was beginning all over again in a different form, because finding a child is not the same as understanding what happened to her. Dave was eventually cleared. Every part of his strange day was accounted for. The suspicion that had nearly destroyed him and Carrie no longer held. They reunited after the case closed, married in 2012, and remained together. But clearance does not erase the emotional path people walked to get there. This is one of the hardest truths in cases like this. Families do not reason their way through fear. They survive it badly, imperfectly, and sometimes by accusing the wrong person because the real person is still hidden. That does not make the fear false. It only shows how violence ripples outward before the facts can catch up. For Carrie, closure was incomplete until she heard directly from Gardner. He initially refused to speak with her. Legal barriers stayed in place. She ran out of formal options and then did something that only makes sense if you understand how grief can turn into purpose. She waited outside the jail and confronted Gardner's mother after a visit. Gardner's mother had helped conceal him in a county where he was not properly registered as an offender, and after that encounter she never spoke to Carrie again. But the message reached her son. The next morning, Carrie was allowed to meet him. She wanted the missing pieces filled in. She wanted the day walked through from beginning to end. Gardner answered her questions. Carrie learned that Amber fought him verbally and physically. At only 14, she resisted to the end. That knowledge broke something open inside her, but not in the way many people expect. She did not forgive what happened. She forgave Gardner because she believed hate would destroy what remained of her life and her ability to be a mother to Allison. That choice unsettles some people. Others understand it immediately. Forgiveness is not always about the one who caused the harm. Sometimes it is the last survival tool left for the person who remains. Out of that long year of searching, another part of Carrie's life took shape. She realized she could do something few others were prepared to do. She knew how to search, how to organize, how to support families standing at the edge of panic. Inspired by Quincy, the Labrador that had once led her toward Paula, she adopted a puppy and named her Amber. Over time, that dog became part of Team Amber Rescue. Carrie and her team helped locate many missing teenagers. In 2011, she helped find the remains of nursing student Michelle Lee, a discovery that moved another case toward answers. Again and again, she stepped into the pain she knew too well so other families would not face it alone. That pattern matters because it challenges a common assumption. People often imagine tragedy ending a life in only one way, by destroying it. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it also reshapes it into something that keeps moving, even while the wound stays open. Carrie did not leave Amber behind. She carried her into every search, every call, every mother waiting for news. There is a quiet kind of courage in that, the kind that does not look cinematic and does not feel heroic while it is happening. It just looks like getting up and going because someone else is now living your worst day. The Kings transformed their grief too. Their story did not stop with Gardner's conviction. Brent and Kelly turned toward reform, determined to challenge the failures that had allowed a known predator back into society. Their campaign became Chelsea's Law in California in 2010, strengthening penalties for violent sex crimes against children and reshaping how repeat offenders were treated. The law carried Chelsea's name, but the deeper goal was to prevent future families from ever needing another law named after a dead child. That mission later expanded through Chelsea's Light Foundation, where the Kings and their son Tyler raised scholarships, advocated for child safety, and pushed for broader protections. Gardner himself admitted he should never have been free. That dark admission underscored what the families had already learned in the worst possible way. Systems fail. Warnings get minimized. Patterns get rationalized. Communities tell themselves a dangerous person is being watched closely enough, controlled enough, supervised enough. Then one day a girl walking to school vanishes. Another goes out for a run and never returns. And everyone is left staring at the same unbearable thought, that the signs were already there, but life kept moving until the damage became irreversible. In the years that followed, the names Amber Dubois and Chelsea King stayed linked, not only by the man who took them, but by the families who refused to let each other disappear into private grief. Carrie found comfort in imagining the two girls together. The Kings felt that too. It was not a legal truth or a factual one. It was something softer, the kind of meaning families build when the world has already taken the concrete things from them. Sometimes that is all that remains. 2 daughters. 2 futures interrupted. 2 families joined by a bond nobody would ever choose. Amber had loved animals, books, and quiet dreams. Chelsea had loved movement, discipline, and the steady freedom of a long run. They were different girls with different paths, but both were young, hopeful, and still becoming who they were meant to be. What survived them was not just a case file, a law, or a conviction. It was the way their names changed the lives around them. A mother turned her grief into rescue work. Another family turned theirs into reform. A city that once searched field by field now remembers both girls together. And maybe that is where this story finally settles, not in the courtroom, not on the hillside in Paula, not on the trail near Lake Hodges, but in the quieter aftermath that followed. Justice came, but it came late. Answers came, but they came at a cost nobody would have accepted if given the choice. What remained was love forced to live in a different shape, carried forward by the people who refused to let Amber Dubois and Chelsea King become only the worst thing that happened to them.